back and read the records and read the Masonic periodicals and read what Masons were writing about Freemasonry, what you find that throughout history, people are making the same complaint that you make, which is that people come in, they become members, they pay their dues, but they're not really attending as much as the people who are the leaders want them to. So I think that issue of participation is, or minority participation, meaning that the minority of people who are members are participating. I think that's a through thread in a Masonic history, right? And what you find is that that the same people who are active in the Blue Lodge are the ones who then go on to become active in the other appendant bodies, right? And then those people are also active, you know, so you've got a minority, and then those people continue to be active, and the best predictor of whether they're going to go from the chapter to the commandery is, you know, membership in other appendant bodies. So you've always got this big number of people that hold membership cards, but who aren't coming to the lodge and aren't going through the chairs. That doesn't seem to change over time. What does change over time, I think, is what you were talking about also with changes in other social structures, right? And how changes in larger society impact the fraternity. So one of the places where this happens is in the 1920s, where in the before the 1920s, the fraternal organizations are all meeting in the evenings. And whether you are a bank president or whether you're a clerk or whether you are a farmer, you know, when the sun goes down, you have free time and you can go to a lodge meeting. But then in the 1920s, with transformations in the economy, suddenly you had a managerial middle class who had the freedom to take long lunch hours. And you suddenly had other fraternal organizations that sprung up, most notably Rotary, that was having their meetings in the lunch hour. And that kind of made a class stratification in fraternal organizations, because, you know, if you were working in a factory and punching the clock and you had 1 hour for lunch, you didn't have time to go off and do your fraternal stuff in the middle of the day. And then the people that were doing that, the people that were getting their fraternal needs met in these business fraternities that met in the middle of the day, they ended up kind of dropping out of the Odd Fellows and the Knights of Pythias and the Freemasons, who continued to work, who continued to have their meetings in the evening. So there was a kind of socioeconomic transformation in the fraternities that happened then in the 1920s because of that. And then the other one that you mentioned is how late era capitalism, starting in the 1970s, required two-family households, two-family income households. And before this, you know, with what historians talk about as the separate spheres, that there were distinct gender roles in marriages. You know, with the separate spheres, men did, the idea of childcare wasn't part of men's responsibility. So they'd come home, they'd have dinner, and then they'd go back out to the fraternity, and there was no question that they were going to have childcare provided by their wives, right? That was kind of, you know, a lot of in the last 6 months we've ended up talking about structural racism, right? Well, this is an example of structural sexism, right? That the fact that men had the freedom to go off and belong to all these different fraternal organizations in the evenings was dependent upon the fact that they had free childcare labor from their wives, right? And that changed in the 1970s with the transition in the economy so that middle-class families could not support themselves with only one income. And once you had women coming home tired from work as well, that created this problem that you're talking about of men can't participate in the fraternalism because they have to figure out what they're going to do about childcare.
And the in the 1970s also, I've been researching some of these things. You also saw, I think it was called the Great Decoupling. It was when you saw median incomes level off, but GDP continue to go up, and that just reflects the need for two-income households, which is you see this GDP increasing, which is an indication that the economy is going well, but individuals can no longer afford to support themselves on one income because the median income isn't raising, which I think is an interesting thing.
Which is leading us to the high levels of income inequality that we see currently.